Alrighty, so we will get started, and I'm going to text the other volunteer, but welcome everyone, and thanks for joining. Lillian is our Director of Clinical Service. If you're able to turn on your camera here and there, that would help us as speakers. That would be greatly appreciated. And when it comes to the training today, Lillian you all received like a brief trauma-informed care training from me, but Lillian will go more in depth. Then Tracy will log in and do our child care portion of the training. And then I will finish it off with cultural and boundaries. I don't think we'll be here till 1, but I just want to give you guys a heads up. We are super excited to have you in the playroom area. It is much needed. June 2nd is when kids are, I think it's most of all of our kids' last day of school. So what happens, and they're all in the shelter, so we need more hands on deck because the playroom is getting utilized more just because they're in the building longer during the day. So it's definitely more helpful, and as you can know, kids want one-on-one attention. So when we have more hands on, we can get more one-on-one attention for the kids. So this is exciting. And the playroom has been closed since COVID, so we are excited to relaunch again. Alrighty, I'm going to put myself on mute, and Lillian.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I'll let Tracy probably talk to you guys a little bit more about the playroom, but we really are excited. We're going to be doing some really exciting, innovative things during the summer and trying to see if we can kind of run a little mini camp for the kids who are going to still be in our shelter during the summer. And we just arranged for a petting zoo to come in at near the end of August. It just sounds like it's going to be so much fun. I know, Mackenzie. And so they said something about
there's going to be a camel, so y'all want to be there. Y'all want to be there. It's going to be August 20th. You want to be there.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure that whatever's on my calendar that day, I clear that time off because I want to be back there to see all those animals, and especially since they're bringing in a camel. I'm like, what? But we will let. So I don't want to steal all of Tracy's thunder, so I'll just move on to my part of the presentation. My focus today is really going to be on trauma-informed care training, and we really focus on that because the people that we are working with, the children that we're working with, are kids who have actually seen violence, may have been abused themselves, been involved and observed their parents being abused by the abuser. And so the kids come to us with a lot of trauma, and so do the adults in the building as well. Next slide. And so what we do, there you go. So what we do is look at trauma. And so if we looked at trauma, the definition that we use is that individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual. That could either be physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And it depends on that individual and how they see that trauma. But depending on how the trauma affected them, it can have lasting results or effects on their lives. And it affects them mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, as well as spiritually. And it affects how they function in life and how they see life and how they deal with things in life. So if you guys, it's like two of you here, if you could take a few seconds here to think about what are some of the traumatic events other than domestic violence that our survivors maybe have experienced in their lives or people experience in their lives in general.
Yeah, I was thinking, this is Sally. I was thinking maybe a car accident.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Absolutely. And it depends on that individual. It could be two people that were involved in a car accident. One person got out, saw the car, and said, well, I've got insurance. we made it out alive. The car can be repaired and it's fine. Another individual that's in that car accident may get out of that car and go, and they're kind of losing it. The police come and this person ends up with a panic attack. So now they got to call the paramedics. This person could end up in the hospital. And it's because of their own life experience and how that car accident affected them. So it could be a very traumatic experience for one person and not such a traumatic experience for another individual. Any other ideas about trauma? Other traumatic events that people could have experienced in their lives?
Sudden loss of a loved one.
Mm-hmm. Loss of a loved one certainly creates trauma. Um, uh, we all experience grief and loss in different ways, and that it could certainly impact us. So thank you for sharing.
COVID-19.
Oh, yes. Very good. COVID-19. And I say this to everyone when I've done trauma trainings on trauma informed care in the past. The one of the things that I typically use. So thanks, Sally, for the car accident. The car accident was one of the things that I focused on because many of us have been in car accidents, or seen a car accident, or had someone they knew that was in a car accident. But COVID-19 affected us for sure. It has been a very traumatic event that in one way or another, all of us here in the United States, as well as people across the world, have been traumatized by it because it changed our lives. One of the things that COVID-19 did when you look at trauma is that for many people, it renders that person helpless and it feels like it's an overwhelming force. And COVID-19 was like that. It was an overwhelming force that kind of hit all of the countries as well as the United States. We really didn't know what we were supposed to do. Were we supposed to wear a mask? Not wear a mask? Do you wash your hands? Do you not? Do we need to shelter in place and stay in place or not? So it was an overwhelming force, and it continues to affect us in one way or another, even today. It involved threats to life or bodily integrity. We certainly heard about people who ended up with COVID and died because of it, or because they had a personal encounter with the person who had it. We heard a lot about doctors and nurses and people who were working on the units or in emergency departments that came in contact with someone that they were assisting and ended up getting COVID and dying themselves. It disrupts a sense of control and connection and meeting, and that certainly happened. In March of 2020, we had to start to shelter in place. And although because we're essential employees, we didn't stop working at Choices or in any of the agencies at Lutheran Social Services. Many folks did have to do that. And so you didn't have control over what was going on in your lives. You were separated from your family members and from your friends. Many people who were in school ended up having to do school virtually. College students came home from college. So it disrupted a sense of control, connection, and meaning with people. It confronts human beings with the extremities of helplessness and terror. And in many cases, many of us did feel very helpless about this, and it was very terrorizing because at the time there was not a vaccine. And again, like I said earlier, we didn't know, do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? What kind of mask do you wear? And then in many instances, we didn't have enough of the PPE to protect ourselves if someone got COVID in our shelter. And it had certainly we responded to it as a catastrophe, and it still feels like that in some cases today. Next slide. Other traumatic events that people experience, and for many of the families that we're working with, certainly poverty creates traumatic events for individuals in their lives. Many of the people that we're working with certainly are homeless, don't know if they're going to be able to find a place to live, may not be working, may be receiving food stamps or Medicaid. And for many of those folks, they may have been going from one place to the next after they left their abuser before they even came into our shelter. Racism is something that we hear about and talk about often, and we hear about it across the country. Many of the things that are happening to individuals are related to racism. And racism itself has a whole nother way of terrorizing and creating trauma for individuals in our society. Historical trauma, we've heard a lot in the news about the Afghan refugees, as well as the war that's going on with Russia um, and and Ukraine. And we know that our country is looking at accepting uh, refugees from those countries. One of the things that we need to realize is that when people come to us from other countries, they bring with us their historical trauma that they've experienced in their war torn countries. And so they're dealing with the trauma that they're bringing with them from the wars, as well as then trauma is also, I think, happening for them when they come to a new country. And they in a new country, they're unsure of how we do things here in the United States, and that can create traumatic events for them as well. Invasive medical procedures can certainly happen to individuals. They can go into the hospital and they're going to be operated on for one thing, and then they wake up and find out that the wrong knee was replaced, or that the wrong kidney was taken out, or that they went in for one thing and then they find out they had a heart attack and other complications during the surgery. And so that can also create trauma for individuals. Community trauma is certainly happening. I think COVID-19 can certainly be considered a traumatic event, as well as a lot of times here in Franklin County, you hear a lot about areas where there are a lot of shootings and murders that are happening in those communities. Because of that, that is creating community trauma as well. And then when you're dealing with a family member that may have mental illness or substance abuse issues, that creates chaos and confusion and inconsistencies in those households that also create trauma as well. People who grow up in an environment where a relative was sick, and so parents were more focused on taking care of that sick relative, that can create trauma for children growing up in those households as well. Traumatic experiences in one's household really can affect them by causing physical, emotional abuse, as well as sexual abuse. Children who grew up in those environments feel very much emotionally and physically neglected. And then there's household dysfunction that I just talked about a little bit, the mental illness that can happen, the substance abuse. Kids who grow up in a home where divorce or separation happens, creates trauma for those children. Certainly the kids that we're working with where a parent is being abused both emotionally and physically, and then having a relative that's incarcerated in the prison or jail system can create trauma for children growing up in those households as well. So one of the things that we tend to do is to focus on what is known as adverse childhood experiences. For the adults that come into our shelter, one of the things that the crisis clinician does is she gives them this tool that's called adverse childhood experiences. We know that people who call us as adults that are coming into the shelter because of a domestic violence event typically also have a lifetime of trauma that they've experienced in their lives as well. And so this helps us to provide education to them as to how the trauma that they've experienced in their lives have affected them. So the adverse childhood experience, or the ACE, was actually a research study that was conducted by Kaiser Permanente. And Kaiser Permanente is a fairly large medical environment of facilities that is located in California. And one of the things that they were starting to notice is that many of the people that were coming to us them as adults have medical problems that were things that could be controlled. Things like diabetes, in many instances, high blood pressure, some of the cancers that people were experiencing, COPD, the fact that they were smoking and using drugs and alcohol, and they were ending up with these chronic health conditions. And one of the things that they were looking at is that these are many of these chronic health conditions are things that could be controlled. So they started to ask questions of individuals about what's going on in your life and what have you experienced in your life. What they learned from that is that many of the people that had these risky health behaviors and had these low life potentials and the possibility of having an early death also experienced some really significant things in their childhood, from abuse to neglect and other traumatic events that occurred in their lives. And so these risky behaviors that they were experiencing in adulthood was really related to what they had experienced as children growing up. And so they developed the ACEs questionnaire. And one of the things that it shows is that people who score high on those things also have a risk for health problems that can end in an early death. Next slide. So for those individuals that grew up in an environment where there was a relative that was incarcerated, mental illness or alcohol and drug use, if they were abused as a child, maybe physically or sexually, or if they were neglected emotionally and mentally as a child, if they had any of these adverse childhood experiences, what it does is it disrupts their neurodevelopment. What we know is that children who grow up in homes where there is trauma, their brains develop at a slower pace, and it develops differently from a child who grew up in a home without those things. Because their brain chemistries change when in childhood and in infancy, they start to develop social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. These are the children who, at times when they get to school, they're labeled as kids who have ADD or ADHD. They're kids who are diagnosed with learning disabilities. They're kids who have a difficult time socializing in school. They're kids who have emotional outbursts in the school system. So what kids do when they develop these things is that they start to adopt as they grow older health risky health behaviors. Those things include using drugs and alcohol. It includes smoking. Includes eating unhealthily and not exercising. And once they start to adopt these unhealthy behaviors, then these unhealthy behaviors lead to disease, disability, and social problems in the future. They then start to develop those things that I talk about, the high blood pressure, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the diabetes. They get involved in risky sexual behavior. So that leads to maybe getting diagnosed with HIV or other sexually transmitted diseases. And then from that, that leads to an early death. People who develop these things, we know once you develop some of these behaviors, if they don't change and get healthy in their lives, then their life expectancy certainly decreases. So some of those behaviors that I've talked about, they have lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, and also they start to become people who can get a job but can't hold a job, so they start missing work a lot. Again, other things that they start to develop is severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, heart disease, cancer, and then broken bones. And we see many of people who come into our shelter that certainly have black eyes. We've had folks that have come in who jaws are wired shut. They may come in on crutches or in a boot. And for some folks, they are doing treatment for various cancers. So what we start to do with people who are developing, who have experienced trauma, is we stop looking at what's wrong with the individual. For most of us who got in the social service field, we get in the field because we want to figure out what's wrong with an individual so we can tell them exactly what they need to do to fix themselves. And so the field has moved away from that, because one of the things that we learned is that there's some really bad stuff that have happened to people, and that is what is going on in their lives. So we move from a shift of thinking about what is wrong with the people that we're working with to what has happened to you. Next slide. And a shift in thinking is that what we learned from that is that all behavior has meaning. So when we are looking at someone who is sharing with us that they have a history of depression or anxiety or been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, when we look at those things, we know that individual probably has some underlying trauma that they've experienced in their lives. And so the symptoms that we see with those folks are a lot of times adaptations or survivor skills. So we here at Choices, we want to figure out what their strengths are, and we want to take those things and build on their strengths. Even all of their survival skills in many cases could be seen as not necessarily a deficit, but something that they're using in order to survive. And let's try to change that so we can show them how to use those things in a successful way. Working with kids, one of the things that we learned very early on is that prevention is far more impactful. So we want to start to intervene with kids as soon as possible. Our staff work on focusing on getting kids into services and helping parents and kids to kind of take a look at how trauma has affected them so that they can start to change the cycle of abuse in their lives. We see the impact of trauma. One of the things that we say very clearly is that trauma and disability is hidden in plain sight. And so a lot of that, the impact of trauma is behavior disorders. They get diagnosed with alcohol and drug dependency. They get diagnosed with anxiety, with bipolar disorder or borderline personality. And when you're diagnosed with that, probably the underlying thing that's going on in your life is trauma. Many of our residents, and sometimes the kids that we're working with, are kids who are acting out very aggressively, kids who don't get along with other kids in the playroom, kids who are throwing toys, kids who are yelling at other kids in the playroom. A lot of that is related to the impact of trauma and what they've seen in their households before they came to the shelter. So they may be acting out aggressively. Manipulation is one of those things that I have learned over the years that it's not necessarily a negative behavior, but actually a strength. For many of our adults, they are coming to us and they may be asking for the same toiletries over and over at every shift. They may be asking for blankets over and over. They may be asking for more and more snacks in the shelter. And one of the things that we learned is that that's not necessarily, they may be what we consider to be manipulating in order to get those things, but it's also a way of that person getting their needs met. So if we're seeing that with children in the shelter or adults with the shelter, we have to remind ourselves that probably in their life, there was a period of time where there wasn't enough. So there may not have been a period where they were at a place where a kid felt like they got enough snacks or enough food. And so they may be asking for more or holding on to snacks because of that, because there was a period of time when there wasn't enough. And so they want to make sure that they have enough. So what we have to do is to reframe that with them and educate them that we have plenty. So when you run out, please come to us and we can give you more. Self-injury with behavior. Self-injury behavior, we see people who are talking about wanting to hurt themselves, wanting to hurt other people. It may be someone who's cutting, could be someone who's continuing to use drugs and alcohol when we know that drugs and alcohol are not an effective coping skill or a mechanism, and it makes things worse for them in their lives. Criminal behavior, we certainly see people with past history of criminal behavior. And then risky behaviors include continuing to maybe have contact with the abuser, or maybe involved in risky sexual behavior, sleeping with others without protection, and not taking care of themselves. Possible traumas or responses that you could see with kids in the playroom is a child who you're saying, well, that's not how we, or it could be that you're telling a kid, okay, so, childcare is over now, or we're going to move to the next activity. So we're telling kids we've got to clean up the playroom or move on to the next activity. and a kid may get very upset and blow up when you're correcting them. It could be that you're telling kids that it's not okay for you to hit another child, or let's play the game in a fair way, and a kid gets very, very upset. So they blow up, or they start fighting when they're criticized or teased, or they see or think what you said to them is a criticism when it really isn't. And so they start fighting and arguing with other kids or with other adults in the playroom. Resisting transition or changes, which is what I just mentioned. Being very protective of their own personal space. We see this a lot with residents when unfortunately, we are a shelter, and sometimes we have to change rooms because we need the space in order to make room for a bigger family. And so residents getting very upset about that as well, or not wanting to have someone else moved into the room with them. Reckless or self-destructive behavior goes along, I think, with a lot of the other stuff, the risky behaviors that I've talked about. Frequently seeking attention, needing to constantly have a validation from staff members, and then reverting to younger behaviors. Again, we see that with the children in the shelter as well as adults, but we may have a kid who have been potty trained, and then once they come into the shelter, all of a sudden that child is wetting the bed, and that is something that kid didn't do when before they came into the shelter. So reverting back to some of those younger behaviors, and that really is related to that. Definitely is a trauma response. Emotional and physical, certainly kids who may have difficulty sleeping at night. We see that with adults, sometimes having nightmares and reliving the trauma that they've experienced, being very sensitive to noise or being touched. We see children sometimes that have a really difficult time being separated from their parent, or vice versa. We've had parents who just, when they first come into the shelter, we start talking about, well, let's, if you can leave the kid in the child care area, you can go to groups. You maybe you can meet with your case manager in the building, so we can start to talk about goals and things. And that parent is having a real hard time being separated from their children, or the children are having a hard time being separated from the parent. And then that definitely leads to the fact that they have difficulty trusting other people, feeling very sad or angry or afraid, again, related to trauma. And then for many of the parents that we see in the building, a lot of times the parents are saying that the kids have got some medical problems going on, or they themselves have got some unexplained medical problems going on. And then some of the other trauma responses we see, certainly being confused at what is safe and what is dangerous. Sometimes on the playground area, we have to make sure the kids are not standing up, swinging on the swing inappropriately, because we see that a lot. Mackenzie knows that. The swing has had to be repaired on more than one occasion. Playing really rough with toys and using the toys and playing with them, and not in the way that they're supposed to be played with, but doing it in a very dangerous way. Having trouble focusing and concentrating, and for our adults and sometimes our kids, just difficulty imagining a future where there is not chaos, where there's not confusion, where there's not yelling, screaming, and fighting. Those are all trauma responses. And so, but before I continue on, do you guys have any questions? Because I know we're moving through this. Okay, so we'll go on. Other adaptive responses of when people feel overwhelmed. The shelter itself can be very loud and very noisy. Most of the time, the majority of the people that we have in the shelter are children. Mackenzie, I think I saw this morning we had 125 people in the building. I can't remember how many kids, but I can tell you it's more kids than adults with 125.
Yeah, I think like 3 days ago it was like 78 kids in shelter.
Yeah, and during the summer, I'm not going to be surprised that we get up to probably about 85 or 90 kids. Some of our families are very big, so we could have really, honestly, 55 to 60 adults, but the majority of more kids. So the play area could be loud and wild, which is good because it's kids having fun. That's what we want, is kids having fun, and we got the space to do that. But some of the other adaptive responses when people are overwhelmed is feeling very helpless. You may be working with a child who's feeling very agitated or very just hypervigilant and uncomfortable. Again, you may find a kid who's very quiet, and that child may be depressed or very numb to what's going on around them. Certainly for our adults as well and children, you can also have experienced panic attacks. Again, I've talked about sleep problems. With many of the people that we're working with in the building, they certainly have a lot of shame and self-hatred for what's going on. We know that the parents are certainly blaming themselves for being in an abusive relationship, but kids are also used and abused in domestic violence relationships. So those children that you are playing with and having contact with also may have a lot of shame and self-hatred for what's going on in the household. And kids also blame themselves a lot of times for the abuse. They may not be able to share that like an adult can. And so what we know with children is that children have a tendency to have a lot of that acting out behavior, a lot of the aggression, a lot of the fighting that goes along and not getting along with other kids in the play area is because they're not able to say that I feel very guilty about what happened in the household before we came in the shelter. They're not able to say that they have a lot of shame and about that. And so they're blaming themselves as well. And then self-destructive behavior, I've talked about that. Certainly, a lot of the adults may start to use substances and have underlying eating disorders because of that. And we know a lot of those things are related to the adaptive responses to trauma. People use survival skills in order to survive the trauma. And any of us who comes in contact with a traumatic experience, like the car accident, or like if we walked in and folks were fighting, we respond to that in several different ways. And typically, our survival responses is either going to be fight, flight, or freeze. Each of us in a situation like that usually uses one of these things. In the fight response, the coping behaviors that we typically use are is that we're struggling to regain power and control in that situation. And especially if we're feeling coerced, if we're feeling threatened by someone else, we may fight back because we're just trying to gain control because we feel out of control. And a lot of times survivors get labeled different things. And so we have a tendency to label people as being treatment resistant or challenging authority or being non-compliant, when really what that person is that they're feeling overwhelmed in a situation. They may be feeling triggered by that situation. And so they're trying to regain control. In the flight response, people have a tendency to give in to whatever's going on or whoever's in power. And so what they tend to do is that they appear to be passive, and other people label them as being passive or saying that they're using the system or can't be helped. In the freeze situation, which many of us go into when we are traumatized, is that people tend to disengage, keep to themselves. They may leave our services. Sometimes people abandon our shelter, and they are being labeled as being unmotivated or being chronic. When we start to label people like that, what happens is that it keeps us from seeing the situation from their perspective. And so what we have a tendency to do when we don't view people through the lens of trauma or through understanding that this is probably a traumatized individual and a lot of really bad things have happened to them, then it prevents us from having a relationship with them or developing a relationship with them. What we know very clearly is that the people that we work with are survivors. And for many of our victims of domestic violence, they like to be called survivors because they are. And they're also very resilient individuals as well. And resilience happens when people are nurtured, when they're supported, when they feel like they are a part of a situation where other people believe in them. And when we do those things with individuals, when we share that we believe them, when we support those folks, when we high five the kids when they've done something, when they're in an activity and they've done something great, like they helped to clean up the play area, or they stopped swinging on the swing when we asked them to, when they started to be nice to other kids and stop fighting or arguing in the play area, when we say, hey, great job with those kids, what we're doing is that we're developing that child's inner capacity of resilience. And so we know that when it's nurtured, when it's facilitated, when it's and it can be facilitated by us. And it only takes one person. A lot of times in situations, we think it has to be a whole family and a whole group of people to help an individual to be resilient. In many cases, all that child needs is one person who's consistent, who shows that they believe in that kid, and who supports that child, and that supports that resilience in them. So the trauma-informed approach that we use at Choices is that, first of all, for all of us, and we've been very fortunate, we've had some changes in our leadership over the past several months, but one of the things that I've heard about from our new vice president, and she said this often, is that we need to realize that all of us have been traumatized in one way or another. Whether that was through COVID, whether that was through things that have happened in our lives, in one way or another, we've all been traumatized. And so we need to realize that we've all been impacted by trauma, but there are paths for recovery. We need to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in all of us, whether that's our staff, whether that's our volunteers, anyone who comes to our building, our clients, and certainly our families. We need to be able to see those signs and symptoms of trauma in them. And then we need to respond. And the way we respond is in our policies, in our procedures, and in our practices. And most importantly, we need to not re-traumatize the people that we're working with. So for us as a staff, we know that if we're dealing with a parent or a child who is yelling and screaming at us, that first of all, we know that we don't take those things personally, and then we know it's not about us. And so we're not going to rise to yelling and screaming back at them. Ways to help those who have experienced trauma is, first of all, just to listen. We as a staff know that sometimes our families and our kids and our adults are going to share some really horrendous things with us. And that happens when they develop a relationship with us, when we show that we're consistent and that we care about them. So the thing that we do is that we listen. We control our reactions to what they're saying to us, because sometimes they're sharing some really horrible things. And then we encourage them to take care of themselves. We encourage them to get enough rest, to eat well, to exercise, and to make time to just relax and chill out. And that's really what we want kids and families to do in the building. And then we acknowledge their achievements. For kids, it's just acknowledging that, hey, they went to school today and they did a great job. Many of the kids come in and come back from school each day, and they're sharing with the child care staff what happened at school today and how well they did things at school today. So we acknowledge their achievements. For our parents and our adults, acknowledging the achievements that they're getting as they're working on their goals with their case manager. And then when we listen to them, we don't interrupt them. We just listen to their story. In many cases, we don't have all the answers. Even as clinicians and case managers and staff in the building at Choices, sometimes we don't have all the answers, and sometimes there isn't an answer. But we just listen and we don't interrupt that person and just allow them to share what's going on with them. We avoid offering examples from our own lives and talking about ourselves, because we're not really here at work and at Choices to talk about our own lives. We're really here to serve the kids and the parents that come into the building. Avoid offering simple reassurances such as, I know how you feel, Are you going to be okay? Because we don't know that. For the families that we work with, they've gone through some really horrible things. So things may not be okay for a while. Avoid using general phrases such as look on the bright side, or avoid placing expectations on those individuals. Any questions? Because I know that was a lot of information that I just went through.
How are we?
All right. I just had a quick question. For the simple reassurances, what would be like a better, I guess, way to kind of reassure them? Or should we just like avoid that entirely?
I think in reassurances, it's reaffirming that they're safe right now, that they're safe, they're in our building, and that's an important thing for them right now. So reassuring that individual that they're safe, because the stories that they may be sharing with you is because when they weren't feeling safe at all. It could be a kid who shared that dad beat up mom, and that they saw, you're playing a game and all of a sudden that comes out. You didn't ask for that question, but the kids will start to share that, yeah, when I was at home, my dad beat up my mom, or my dad said these horrible things to me. And so it really is just reassuring that child that right now they're in the shelter and that they're safe and that their parent is safe.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions that you have for Lillian before she logs out?
Well, thank you guys. I am so happy that you all are wanting to be volunteers at Choices. We appreciate our volunteers each and every day when they come into the building, because we know that they're there to brighten the smiles on the faces of the children and the parents that are in the building. And we appreciate your work and your help and your assistance as we're doing the work that we do. So thank you all.
Thank you, Lillian.
All right, Mackenzie. Hey, Tracy.
Hi.
Hey, good morning. Okay.
Good morning.
Well, I am going
Perfect
to,
timing.
yes. I am going to jump off, and Tracy can share a little bit more about the exciting thing about the petting zoo. Because we're
Yes.
excited about that coming up in August. We did
Absolutely.
start to talk a little bit about that, Tracy. So you can share this more with the volunteers about what the plans are for the summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll see you guys later. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Lillian.
Thank you, Lillian.
Bye.
All
Thank you.
righty. Everyone doing good out there? Sally, Chelsea, and Kelsey still doing good?
Yep, fine. Great, great, great. Yep,
Yep.
very interesting.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, I need to hold on one second.
Do you want me to do the sharing, or do you want to take
Can
over?
you do the share? That would be great. You're
I
in your
sure
office.
can.
Are you in your office?
I'm in my office.
It looks like it. Okay, I'm obviously home on the couch and feel not as
Okay.
on when I'm not in my office, so that helps. Yeah.
Okay, let me. The only thing is, you might just have to be like, Kenzie, move slide. Oh, where
Okay.
did you go? Okay, hold
Did
on.
Lillian just go through the, like a lot of the slides?
Yes, she went through she just went through the slides and
That's
she
kind of what I'm gonna do.
ad-libbed. So
Yeah.
this is Tracy's first time doing this presentation.
Yes.
Tracy is our family service coordinator. She oversees the department. So all questions relate to Tracy. I will say she will be out for the summer, but she has a wonderful team. Like, her team is amazing.
Excellent.
So and she'll go over the team's roles on this PowerPoint. So questions all about children, this is for Tracy.
Yes.
So
If you have any questions, direct them to me. I don't know, will they be there for the spring kickoff or summer kickoff? Because I'll be there on the 3rd if they're there and I can meet some of them.
Chelsea will be. Kelsey, I think, are you on it, Kelsey?
I'm not right now. I might be able to if I can get off work.
Yay.
We would appreciate that, but work is first. So.
Well, I appreciate you definitely all wanting to volunteer. It is very helpful, very beneficial to us. I don't know what's been said, but our facility can be very transient. Like we have people coming and going, but then we have people there that could be there for a year. And right now we have a lot of children. So that goes through that. Again, we could have a lot of kids that are a lot of teenagers, a lot of kids that are a lot of infants. Right now we have a lot of kids ranging from newborn babies all the way to 17. So we always like to try to find activities and meet the needs of everyone. And so this summer we'll have like teen activities as well as school age activities and non-school age activities, and then also activity, and anyone can participate. Just because of age, we're not going to say they can't, unless it's a specific thing like Mackenzie and I were saying that for the summer kickoff, safety wise, with the bounce house, for example, certain ages can't be there for safety reasons. But other than that, we always want to encourage, anyone to participate and not feel excluded. But we do make sure that we have activities that meet the needs throughout the ages and developmental ages. So I oversee the play area, and I have on my team Sarah, who is the youth advocate, Hannah, who's the educational assistant, and Sam, who's the child care worker. Right now, I'm looking to hire another child care worker. And so it really is more important than ever. And so appreciated that you guys are willing to volunteer, because we are short a child care, someone in the child care room. Hannah and Sarah, the youth advocate and educational assistant, help as needed and really do help a lot. They're tremendous. But they need to do their role first a lot of times. And then we'll end up getting inundated in the child care room and then need to pull them. So having you a part of this team will be very, very helpful. The youth advocate, Sarah, she works as a liaison between the schools a lot of times and transportation, setting up the children with their transportation. So we have children coming into the center that are used to taking the bus, but now they're not in their school area. We will arrange that transportation for them. Also, we have a lot of children that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how we want to look at it, need to transfer their schools. And Sarah will help them make that transfer. She also will help register them with the new school. And so we have summer enrollment and check in with the parents to see if their child is going to need to be enrolled in a new school. Then we have Hannah, who is the educational assistant. And this role actually is still growing and being tweaked. And she's really taken it on really strong. She has a lot of strengths. And it was originally, she's only second person that had it, but the only person non-COVID. The first person, an educational assistant, was hired specifically to help the children do online educational learning through the schools during lockdowns. We decided to keep that position. So kids are obviously back in school now. So Hannah will help, let's say, if someone's being homeschooled, or and oversee the educational needs with that. But we don't have too much of that. And so what she does is really look into educational and fun activities that we can have in our play area and offer to the residents and their children. She also has worked closely with Mackenzie as a part of the Study Buddy program that offers tutoring and help to kids every Wednesday evening. She has signups for tutoring throughout the day. She's helped an adult resident learn to read. She helps young children. So anything at like the educational realm, people can reach out to me and I'll direct them to Mackenzie, Hannah, or you, Mackenzie, if you want. Um, and um, uh, or they can go right to Hannah, because a lot of people here that have been here a while, they know to go to Hannah for some of those things, and we have signups. This summer we're going to be offering a summer reading book club. If you read so many books, you get a free Frosty that Mackenzie and um, Hannah have worked together, collaborating, figuring out like a reward that we can offer the children for the summer book program. So it's nice to have some of these incentives, but we also want to do things that aren't always about an incentive too. But it's fun to try as much as we can to offer these children as much normalcy as possible. And what if they weren't in the shelter? What would they be doing in their community? Like a lot of libraries offer summer reading programs. So it's an example that we just extend that here to our services in house. And also something to think about is a lot of our children and parents um, haven't had any of these opportunities even outside our shelter, or they're so overwhelmed with some of the trauma they're experiencing, or maybe some of them were not, quote, allowed, because their abuser, had them locked in. Or so this is giving our residents and their children not only an extension of our community and offering these services to them on what they would have and would be able to take part in the community, but a lot of them, this could be their first time. And so as an example is the petting zoo, for example, a lot of these kids have not been to the zoo or had the experience of petting zoos. And so us being able to bring this to them is extremely um, rewarding, but beyond that, educational and fun for them, and offering them opportunities that they may not normally have. And Mackenzie, you can always interject if you want to add anything too. So my area with the play area is supposed to be, our number one priority is safety. And it's a safe place for children to learn, play, meet new friends. We have had relationships, between kids and peer-to-peer relationships that build, that's really healthy, because we have a family, for example, that was for years not able to socialize and leave their home. And so it was really beneficial for these children to see how other children interacted and to be able to slowly start engaging with these children. There is role modeling, and not everyone is raised the same. Not everyone has the same discipline standards in their families. And so we try to really educate the parents and the kids on appropriate discipline, and really make it more about redirection. And so, quote, if we want to call it discipline, consequences, I mean, people are funny with different terminology, but really it's about us role modeling to them healthy, positive coping skills on how to handle their children. And when these children see other kids in the play area, learning like appropriate behavior or not appropriate behavior. And so then everyone can work together as a team and helping them, because you will see some parents yelling at their children. You will see some verbal inappropriateness. We also are mandated reporters, and so if we see any physical, we're a domestic violence shelter. So I know that maybe spanking or something is okay in some households. That's not okay at Choices. No physical or verbal uh, discipline, if you want to call it that, because we are trying to offer our clients a safe, non-threatening, non-scary place for them. And maybe these kids might be used to maybe hearing their mom yell, but they might not be used to hearing someone else yell. And so even just the voice of another parent or adult could trigger them. And same with the residents, if they're hearing yelling, arguing, fighting. We try to create a very calming environment, and sometimes it's a struggle. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, but that's our goal. So I want our play area to be an area where parents and kids can come, let their guard down, feel safe, calming, and use it as a positive coping mechanism. And having parents be able to drop off their kids if they want so they can do self care. Maybe they want to sleep, maybe they want to take a shower. A lot of times they might have a visit with their counselor on site or crisis manager on site. But we also want to give them the opportunity to sit down for story time with their child or do an activity with their child or be a part of, for example, this summer kickoff. And not to ignore their trauma, but to have their children and then take a step away for a little while and be able to interact in a positive way with one another, because so many times, they come in and they're on eggshells, and we want to try to help, regulate their emotions a bit and give them something else to focus on, while also teaching them that they can direct their energy into something positive. Let me see. Oh, I mentioned some of that, didn't I? Some of this just comes to my mind without even looking at this. Childcare, meet with a K. This is, oh, yes, importantly, it's a short, we are not a licensed daycare. Meaning that they can't drop their kids off for hours on end and leave the premises. We offer 1.5 hours in the morning and 1.5, well, let me say this. We're open 9 to 12, closed 12 to 1 for lunch, and then open 1 to 4. So we have an hour to clean up till 5. So we all residents can take an hour and a half a day for our services, or if they are meeting with someone on the premises, like the crisis manager I referred to or a counselor, they can utilize another hour and a half for a total of 3 hours. But that's not a daily occurrence. Usually it's an hour and a half, and then the 3 hours comes in when they have those specific meetings, and sometimes they just utilize that for an hour and a half too. But they are not, parents are not allowed to leave the premises. They need to be able to be contacted at any time. For example, we don't change diapers, we don't provide snacks. They get that through our dining room that's connected. So if, for example, a child needs to be changed, we have the parents have signed in with their phone number, and we call them, and they need to come back down, and they need to take care of that. I'm trying to think. We also have child care agreements where they can take a child care agreement class with another resident and set up babysitting with that other resident. The play area is separated by ages: infants 1 to 5, 5 to 11, and then we also have a teen room. The spaces all have access to the appropriate selection of toys, games, books. We have a dress-up corner, full play kitchen, sensory toys, television, arts and crafts tables. And so, again, if there are any questions, you can always direct them to me or ask my team if I'm not there. And if they don't have the answer, they can find out for you. The teen room, we're trying to figure that out. It's a little bland right now, and I want to kind of spice it up. But it's supposed to be a place to hang out with their peers, or just hang out if they need mental health break, and TV, video games, gaming chairs, just a place that they can be where they're not feeling like they have to be in the child care area. Yeah, I talked about that. What I do, yep, we talked about that. Trauma. 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, which is more than 3 million children in the USA. And this is just really what's reported too. So we all know that these stats vary, if anything, higher. 90% of these children are eyewitnesses to the abuse. So even if they are themselves aren't being physically or verbally or sexually abused, they are witnessing it, which is still abuse. It changes them. It changes the way they develop. It changes the way they see the world. So they are experiencing trauma the same as the parent that they came into the shelter with. 30 to 60% of perpetrators of intimate partner violence also abuse children in the household. So that's where we go down to when they are actually also being physically, sexually, or verbally abused themselves. And there's a lot of verbal abuse, and I want to make it clear that verbal abuse, I don't want to dismiss any of the abuse, but the bruise can heal, the words stay with you forever. So a lot of times it's harder. These children come in with a lack of confidence, some of them not wanting to make eye contact, scared. Their souls have been shattered. And it's our job and role to try to rebuild them and give them some of that strength and confidence. Experiencing IVF in childhood is the single greatest predictor of experiencing it in adulthood. Again, it's hard to break the cycle, guys. It's unfortunate, but they're learning they're learning that's what's appropriate. Even if they know that's bad inside and their gut instinct is like, this isn't right, that actually ends up being what's safe for them. And they're drawn to that same type of relationship because that's all they know. So they think it's normal. Even if they can't, even if they like someone's talking to them and logically they'd be like, okay, no, this isn't normal. It is what psychologically they are drawn to. So you put a healthy individual and an unhealthy individual, an abuser and a non-abuser in front of you, they're most likely, without even thinking about it, they're going to be drawn to the abuser. And so that's also why I want to go back to also parents are never to leave their children alone in our shelter. They are always supposed to be with them, obviously, other than if they drop them off with us, because we have all sorts of people at our shelter coming in and out, and who knows if maybe they have victimized someone themselves. And then that makes our children in the shelter also a target. And then these children who are vulnerable could subconsciously be drawn to some of those unhealthy individuals. Boys who witness domestic violence are twice as likely to abuse their own partners and children when they become adults. Statistically, it's boys that are more physically abusive, men. And most often they learned that's learned behavior that they saw. And again, it's about breaking the cycle all the way around. So these boys, even though they're coming into the shelter and they know what dad did to mom or boyfriend did to mom or who girlfriend did to mom, anything, even though they know that and they don't like it and they're sad and mom's hurt and they're hurt, they still grasp on, the minds are sponges, to subconsciously taking in that abuse and then implementing it into the future on someone else. Children that are exposed to violence in the home are 15 more likely to be physically or sexually assaulted than other children because they're more vulnerable. A lot of their souls, like I said, have been shattered. They lack confidence. They're looking for a security figure. They're looking for a safe person. So a person can pretend they're that safe person for them and then take advantage of them. So we really need to look out for them. Children who have been exposed to IPV often suffer from insomnia, bedwetting. They're more likely to experience difficulties in school, exhibit a higher level of aggressive behavior, have a higher level of depression and anxiety, have changes to their cognitive development, which is what I'm saying. It changes the way they see the world. Chemically, you are altered by witnessing, observing that, and also enduring it yourself. They're 6 times more likely to commit suicide, 50% more likely to abuse drugs or alcohol, and are 74% more likely to commit a violent crime. That's why a lot of people that are caught committing a crime or committing suicide or doing alcohol and drugs, you research their history and you'll often link it to abuse somewhere down the line that they experienced. The Children's Domestic Abuse Wheel, I encourage all of you to take a look at it, a deeper look at it than just what I'm briefly going to be going over. But I think it's a great example of what our kids go through and feel and how the violence does affect them. There's the emotional abuse, the effects from that, and how sexual abuse adds a whole other layer. A lot of these children are experiencing multiple forms of abuse, not just one or the other. And how, for example, boys that are abused, their self-esteem is altered in a different way than girls that are experiencing abuse because of societal norms and standards of they're supposed to be macho, and why did they let that happen, and they must be gay or called names, or stereotyping is a lot of times thrown out. And again, not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but having it said in a slanderous term because something bad happened to you affects them. And it makes it a lot harder for boys to come forward because they have the pressure of society making them feel like they have to hide their emotions and they have to be the tough guy. And that is also why prior to puberty, boys are just as much likely to be assaulted as girls. It's after puberty that the stats go down for boys, and girls their whole life were targets. Women, the female. Okay. And I want to say we have to be careful with terminology, but the female, like when I say people who identify as a female, what we consider our female body parts, we are more likely to be abused throughout our whole life. Where boys, it's up to the age of 13 usually. Prepubescent boys are just as much of a target as girls. Okay, you can move on. Thanks. Reactions to trauma vary. Change based on life experiences, change based on family reactions to violence and trauma. Behavior is often how children verbalize their needs or feelings. How a child responds to being told no is often based on previous methods they used to survive, such as manipulation. Well, I'll say that in a minute. We don't see everything because I'm just going to use boys as an example. But they internalize a lot more statistically. Girls do too, but we all show it differently, girls and boys internalize it more because, again, it goes back to a lot of times societal standards, and even their family may be instilling that. Their parent saying, "You're a boy, toughen up. It's not okay to cry," that type of thing. We want to have an open childcare area. We want to never stifle a child to talk about their feelings or share their feelings. What we can do if we're contending with something, and our goal and my goal when I'm working with clients and their children, is to teach them how to handle things in a developmentally age-appropriate, healthy fashion. Our job as, for example, parents or adults that take care of children, we're trying to create healthy, individual, independent, functioning, contributing members of society. And when someone experiences trauma, that is putting a knife right in there, and it sets that back and it changes them and it chemically alters them. And we can try our best to chemically get them back regulated again. So we might have outbursts in the child care room. We might have things that the kids being aggressive or throwing toys. And yes, that's not appropriate. And we can redirect them. We can ask them how they're feeling. We can, and again, role model. I always tell people, children through adults, I will never, ever tell you how to feel. No one has a right to tell you how to feel. You have a right to your feelings. However, we're responsible for how we react and respond to that feeling. And it's us teaching people how to react and respond appropriately to that feeling. For example, just because this happened to you doesn't make it okay to do to someone else. You can move on. These are just some, like the power wheels vary. I don't want to minimize the power wheel. That's important. I want you to take a look at that. But these are some other just examples of that you can look at that are telling. The behavior iceberg, what you can see on the outside, the behavior words, achievements, it's all what you can't see that makes those things and creates those things on what you do see. The security, the thoughts. So you can be insecure, but you might not verbalize that, but that's going to be shown through your behavior. What I've taught people through a long time of doing this is anger, for example. You're going to see a lot of anger. And anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is covering up the true feeling and emotion. So if you're angry, if a child's angry, an adult's angry, what is it that is making them feel this way? Are they disappointed? Are they sad? Are they struggling with something? Are they feeling isolated? Are they depressed? Are they anxious? A lot of times, anger is the thing that we see, but anger is not the true feeling. It is a secondary emotion covering up the actual true emotion. Negative beliefs develop. These are the reactions children who are exposed to violence. Violence gets you what you want. Victims are to blame. You do not get in trouble for hurting others. Women don't have the right to be treated with respect. You have two choices, to be the victim or the aggressor. Unhealthy relationships are normal. So this is what they start to believe. They think that they either have to be a victim or the abuser. They don't think women should be treated with respect. And the victim's to blame, not the abuser. That's what they're being taught. Negative feelings then develop. They feel guilty. I caused the abuse. That may come out in anger. So anger here, I'm not necessarily, I might want to change that. But why is mom so angry? Well, mom's angry because she's probably trying to survive. Frustration, no one cares about me, may come out in anger. Worry, is the shelter going to be worse? May come out in anger. Fear, when will they hurt me? Come out in anger. Confusion, I love, but I hate my mom. I love my mom so much, but why didn't she protect me? Why did she allow this to happen? Looking at it from their point of view, not knowing that mom herself is trying to protect them maybe and struggling to survive and have them not all maybe hurt if they haven't been. We've had a child that is one of the sweetest children, a young boy, and he is he's very sweet, but experiencing some depression, some anxiety, super smart in school, gets good grades, but is bullied, picked on. We're getting him counseling outside of our facility too, through Nationwide. it came out. So he lashed out at mom. And again, they're here because they came from an abusive situation. But not also he only contending with witnessing mom being severely abused day in and day out, but he wasn't being able to handle his emotions when this was happening, and went in the back and started playing with a match. Ended up burning the whole house down, killing the pets and animals and everything inside. Do you think this child is dealing with some guilt? And it's coming out in other ways. So he might be performing well in school, which is so surprising considering, but then he's also lashing out at people, lashing out at mom. But it's really a combination of multi trauma where he's dealing with abuse plus the guilt of causing this fire to these animals and feeling that direct responsibility for them. And that's, you're going to hear all sorts of cases. And I don't want to minimize anyone's abuse or trauma at all, but you're going to see a wide range of maybe someone coming in after someone hit them a couple times, to someone that's been in an abusive relationship and isolated in their home for 20 years and playing in snow for the first time this winter. So these are just some examples. I'm not trying to scare you, but I want to let you know this is what we do, and we're here to help these people. We are here to provide them with the safety, love, nurturing, and support that they need. And for us to recognize it can be hard sometimes. I'm not saying it's easy when these kids are screaming and lashing out, or there's a verbal altercation between some of the residents. It can be scary. I'm not gonna minimize that. But taking a step back, it's like, this is all they know. And I'm all about accountability and responsibility. It doesn't give them a right to do some of the things, but it's us reacting appropriately to whatever the situation is. And when we're dealing, me specific, like my role is the children, you deal with the parents when you deal with the children, but I'm focused on primarily the children. They don't know any better with a lot of this stuff. And we need to take a step back and realize, why are they acting this way, and have a better understanding of them and some empathy and compassion. Mackenzie and I both know study buddy program. A boy was getting in and out of his chair, not wanting to sit still. We're like, what's going on? He's a great kid. Ended up, the long and the short of it is, he couldn't read, and he was in 4th, 5th grade, and he couldn't read at all. Like, not even know the letters of the alphabet. That was his coping skill, was avoidance. And so once we realized that, I was on the phone with that school making sure he had an IEP, and he was a child that was going to fall through those cracks. So, keep your eyes and ears open, and you'll it's not easy sometimes, but very rewarding, very rewarding. 3 reaction types of the child are the pleaser, perfectionist, overly compliant child. That goes into 1. The aggressive child, the withdrawn child. I've talked about the aggressive child, sometimes lashing out and everything, but there's the pleaser that we have to be careful about. They want to please, 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 yes, 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 anything you say. And that's not healthy either, because they lack boundaries. And if you lack boundaries, you lack safety, and you're a target. Common behaviors. Wants to make sure everyone else is happy. They don't want to rock the boat. Everything that I just said, basically. They are a target for predators. And their self-esteem shot. They feel like they're only good if they people please and say yes. And they're allowed to have boundaries. Children, as soon as they're out of the womb, are learning boundaries. The aggressive child. We've talked a lot about the aggressive child. Just it will come out in indirect ways. The common behaviors, lashing out, we've talked about that. The withdrawn child. We want to watch out for the withdrawn child, watch for the withdrawn child. it might be, oh, they're so sweet, they're so nice, but what are they internalizing if they are? Why are they withdrawn? Why aren't they socializing? We know they're here because they were either witness of abuse or dealt with the abuse directly. So these are the children I worry about the most, because they seem the least affected and like they're fine, but they're anything but not affected. They are very affected, very impacted. I think I went through some of this, but yeah, some of this you're going to witness in the shelter. And again, I don't want to scare you or anything, but you are in a DV shelter, and inability to follow directions. They might ignore directions, talk back to staff, easily angered. Again, why are they easily angered? Why are they angry? Running out of the childcare area when angry, frustrated, or when the child may think it's a game, using inappropriate language, arguing with other children, or attempting to fight one another, clinginess and separation anxiety, concern about their own safety and safety of others, withdrawn behavior. And obviously notify me or the childcare staff immediately if there's a behavior that concerns you, and we'll handle it. There are times like there might be a reason behind the behavior, but it doesn't, as I was saying, it doesn't make it okay to respond in a certain way to the behavior, for them. I'm saying, for all of us, but so I have called parents to remove their children from the room if they're calling names and slanderous remarks to the staff. That's not okay, and the children have to learn that that is not okay, and it's our role to teach them. We might know that comes from somewhere, and we can certainly work on that, but it's still not okay to be calling my staff horrible names or repeatedly punching them. Again, one throw, okay. Two, it's we assess the situation, but we will intervene. And I want my staff to be safe, and I want the children to learn it's not okay to throw things. We deal with your emotion in a different way. It's not okay to call someone names. We deal with your emotion in another way. Purpose of time and commitment. Providing support to the child care team by engaging youth of all ages in activities with light cleaning of the child care area. Volunteers are asked to commit to 2 shifts per month for 1 year, and the volunteer hours are Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 11:30 and 2:30 to 4:30.
We changed the volunteer hours. I believe we have it from 10 to noon and then 1 to 3.
I'm fine and appreciative and grateful for anyone at any time. The child care volunteer activities, tasks, and responsibilities are to interact with the children in a friendly, positive, and professional manner, work in cooperation with other volunteers and staff, report any issues or concerns to child care team or volunteer manager, provide youth ages infant to teen with support and engaging activities, assist with crafts, games, or free play that can take place inside or outside, and provide a positive reinforcement and promote healthy nonviolent behaviors, assist with keeping the child care areas clean and organized, and follow all agency policies and procedures. Remember too, what's not on here, it's policies and procedures, but confidentiality is really important. Like, for example, I shared some examples with you, but I didn't name names of people. So confidentiality is really important. They're vulnerable. They're hiding, a lot of them. People don't know where they are, a lot of them. That's why, like, Mackenzie knows, and I don't know if this was brought up, we'll take pictures for PR and put out there, but it's always hands, feet, never faces. Volunteers are not permitted to do the following: give children any gifts, change a child's diaper, spank or yell at a child, go into the restroom with the child, speak to children about their situation. You seek a staff if child starts talking about the abuse. De-escalate conflicts between children? No. You reach out to me or the child care staff. You should not have to deal with that. Grant access to the building or restricted areas. Provide residents with any material resources other than what is available to everyone in the shelter.
A couple things to add on to this part. The restroom, when you're in the childcare area, there's 2 restrooms on this, like in the dining room. That's where the kids will go. You will just want to make sure that you are in the dining room. They can go to the bathroom themselves. But what sometimes happens is the kid will say they will go to the restroom and then they will walk off. So you just want to make sure that they are going into the restroom and then coming back. You don't go into the restroom. And then de-escalate again, get staff. However, I always, and Tracy, you can chime in. However, some of the kids are siblings and they're just arguing over little things. So you could, if you know, like, as long as it's not like physical violence, get staff right away. But if it's something where you're just like, okay, I just need to give the kid another coloring book, that's where you can chime in or try to redirect the child.
Yeah. You don't have to be like, oh, you don't have to get me if it's like, Johnny won't give me back my crayon, you know. I mean, you can try to work that out. I'm trusting you can try to work that out. Obviously, if things escalate, get me. Tools for the volunteers. How you can respond. Validate and label their emotions. It appears you're sad today. Or it seems like something's going on. Do you want to talk about it? Or, you know, provide attention, comfort, and encouragement. Listen, be patient, give them choices, empower struggles, because there will be power struggles. Be willing to give up the power and control. It's not about winning. Respond, don't react. Remind children they are safe. Focus on the positive. You are going to need to regulate yourself. We're people, we're humans. We have emotions too. We're not robots. You might need to take a few breaths sometimes. And we are role models. And it's like, okay, how am I going to handle this? And just a few breaths. Take responsibility and be willing to apologize. I'm all about apologizing. I apologize to my own kid and my kids at home, Like, I think one of the best things we can do as adults is let people know everyone, our children, everyone, we're not perfect and we own it and we know it. And it's okay. We make mistakes. You know, I might snap at my kids one day, or like the other day I got home from work. It was one of those days. And it was like right when I got home, and they know usually to give me like a little time to, like, they say, Mom, are you acclimated yet? But I was real short. I'm like, you guys know I need a minute to just, and I was like, I'm sorry I snapped. It has nothing to do with you. That was all me, because we all do carry things. And so the ride home from work is often that time for me to regulate after my work day. But sometimes there's a little bit of it, and it's being aware and having that self-awareness, acknowledging. And I think it's really important just to have ownership. And it's teaching our kids to have that ownership, your own or in the shelter. Avoid these responses: judgment or shaming, especially here, for sure. Criticizing, arguing, offering your opinions, making promises, giving gifts or favors.
I also want to ad lib too for avoid responses. If a child is going into, we had that situation with a volunteer about a year ago where a child went in depth of abuse, try to redirect and try to, that is where you would want staff to handle that situation. If they're talking about their abuse, I wouldn't add into that conversation. Try to redirect into a more playful conversation about what's your favorite color, or try to switch the mindset and then let staff know we don't really want volunteers to get into the conversation of any type of abuse.
No, I agree. And I there was something back there that I was going to say and I forgot to, that it said, oh shoot, I forget, because it seemed like they contradicted each other, but they didn't. And I wanted to clarify that you can talk about and like, oh, why, what makes you upset? Or it seems like you're sad today. But if they open up and start like going on about they're sad because like they were triggered by something or some emotions are surfacing, then you definitely want to get a staff member because then they may need to talk to someone. What does this look like and sound like? You want to validate the child's feeling. Label the emotion. I hear you're angry. I want to change the angry thing. But I hear you are angry, or it sounds like you're angry. But again, what is behind that? If a child's angry, there's something else behind that. And it might be obvious to you. Johnny took Susie's toy, Mackenzie took Tracy's, crayon. It might be obvious what happened. And that might be a matter of like, that's territorial, upset them. But really it's labeled emotion. I noticed you're sad, or I noticed your face is not the same as yesterday. It shows a different, you were smiling yesterday, you're not smiling today. Where are those teeth? Where are those pretty teeth? Or whatever. And see if you can get them to open up in some way. And we all have our own organic way of being able to do that. And you can learn things from watching the staff too engage. But there are ways to get kids to recognize their emotion. You label it and then recognize it. And again, if it goes further, you want to get staff, but you can absolutely label their emotion, and they might say, oh, I'm upset because of this. And then you can assess, is this worth getting staff or not? Recognize children at the shelter have all been through a lot. Tell them it's common, normal, or say, I get why you feel like that. Actually, I disagree with that. I forgot. Okay. I get that you feel like that. Tell them it's common, normal, or say, I don't completely understand, but I can empathize. I felt like this too with other things or certain things. Here's the thing we don't want to do, unless it's something you have experienced yourself. You don't want to minimize or dismiss someone else's feelings. So you never want to say you get it or you understand unless it's been something you've experienced. So if you have experienced a crayon being taken away from you, using a minor example, then absolutely, I understand. I remember I got upset when I was in school and so took a crayon away. That's great. Identify, it's building a relationship and rapport. They understand it's okay to get upset. Again, it's how we choose to handle that behavior. So that's great. But if it's something else that you haven't experienced, then you don't want to say you understand, because that completely negates their feeling. When people have come to me revealing certain things, unless it's something I've gone through, I won't ever say I understand. And I will tell them that. I'll say, you know what, I'm not going to say I understand because I'm not you and I wasn't in that position or situation. However, I have compassion for that and I can't imagine. Listen, that's so important. Sometimes they just want someone to listen. And again, you can assess on what's too much and if you need a staff member. They might just want to talk to you about their school day. Or the summer, the camel coming for the petting zoo. I mean, it's just like someone there to listen that's not, sometimes they're not used to that. They're not used to someone just listening. And sometimes the best thing you can do is listen. They're used to a lot of times being told to shut up or not getting the attention they deserve. And not necessarily because it's the mom or dad's fault who's in the shelter, but they're dealing so much with the survival skills that they're not able to give their kids any more than just trying to give them their basic needs. So listening, and can you see who's at the door? And I'm on the phone, or I mean, I'm on my thing, sorry. I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Shoot. Hold on. Sorry.
How are we doing, everyone?
I don't want my kid to just like go see without me seeing. Okay. So, if a child does disclose something to you, we encourage you to listen to the child with an open heart, allow for the child to know you are there to listen and support them, thank them for sharing with you. We never probe a child to talk about what they may have witnessed, for this can be traumatizing. It can be a huge trigger. Share the information with a staff member. Encourage a child to speak to support, with someone on my team, for sure. And I think we've driven that home for sure. I think you all probably understand that. Encouraging a child. Remember that some of these children have come from verbally and abusive households. Avoid use of negative language towards children. Focus on positives and sharing positive insights. Praise sincerely and honestly, because they can tell. Children will not feel encouraged if the praise is not sincere. Oh, goes right into that, right? Yeah. And praise, I forgot that flowed in. Praise their effort in the process, and this helps attribute the success to their effort. You're acknowledging them, and so many have not been acknowledged. What does this sound and look like? Be specific and let him or her know what action they did right. I loved that you helped pick up those toys. Oh my gosh, the room looks amazing. Reward him or her on their accomplishment. Give a high five, clapping or cheering, and show a genuine appreciation for their success. Oh my gosh, I saw you the other day go up to the to get a drink or to pick out a book. You did that all by yourself. That's great if they're allowed to do that by themselves. Like some of our kids are scared to do something independently. What does this sound and look like? Breathing exercise, redirecting children. We can give them a breathing exercise. I have a ton in my office. Give the child some space to calm down. Calmly explain to the child why their behavior is not appropriate at that time. You calling me that name hurt my feelings. Have you been called a name before that's hurt your feelings? Or how did that make you feel? Sad. Again, as long as it doesn't go into too much, and they go into this long history. And then, so you're getting them also to empathize or to try to understand that empathy, putting themselves in someone else's shoes. If a child attempts to leave the area, sit the child down and explain to them that running out of the childcare area is not a game. Explain that for their safety, we need them to remain in the childcare area. If a situation is escalating or a child is not reacting positively to you or the direction you are providing, please inform one of us. Other ways to help with the arts and crafts, we have a lot of those planned. Schoolwork, we're not going to have that for the summer, but we are offering tutoring still, educational enrichment. Assist the children with getting toys or cleaning up the childcare area. Play with the children outside or inside, and really be a comfort to the child when they're upset. And just the security for them, build a natural organic rapport. What does this sound and look like? The children at Choices have had a very different experience, or very different experiences, multiple, with experience different with violence. Trauma presents differently in each child. The trauma does not define them. They are not the trauma. They are a victim of circumstance. Caring interaction with children is so important, so very important, and the responsibility of each adult, staff, volunteers, parents, and the shelter. This builds resiliency. I always have trouble saying that word. Resiliency towards future and past traumatic experiences. So I hope that all makes sense. Safety is our number one priority, of course. And so the childcare doors are always to remain closed. They must remain closed so children aren't attempted to leave and explore other parts of the shelter without an adult. If a child leaves the child care area, please inform child care staff so that they can safely return child to the playroom. And some children in the shelter have special needs, and others are just energetic and curious. So it's also just remembering that. Food and drinks are not permitted in the child care area, and children are supposed to eat with their parents because we can't possibly, especially with how many people come in and out of the shelter, know who's allergic to what, and know what they're allowed to eat or not. And then childcare staff, we don't provide a snack for the children. Oh, we don't. Yeah, it says we do. Child drop off and pickup. Parents must remain in the building while their children are in day. Okay, so I went over this. We ask parents to pick up after 90 minutes. Only staff are permitted to manage the drop off and pickup process. Childcare staff is here to help and support you in this space. If you feel overwhelmed, and there might be some days you are, and that's okay. We all have it. We all experience that. If you feel overwhelmed in your role or with information that a child has disclosed to you, just tell us. Just tell me. Does anyone have any questions? I know that was a lot of information, but it's important to have it and review it. And I'm just really looking forward to all of you joining us and helping and being a part of our group.
And a little bit about like what this will look like. So when you come to volunteer for the first time, I have Hannah actually made like a little flyer that I'll send you guys of like, again, what you can and cannot do and like what parents can and cannot do. So you have that. Staff will be there majority of all time. There'll always be a staff available for you. And so just you do have that comfort with staff there. A little bit things that are different with the summer of what you guys will be doing. There are some days where you might be outside. And then like this summer, the playroom area has really looked at like doing week themes. So we will be keeping you updated on those week themes and everything like that. So just an FYI.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun things planned. We have a new executive director that's giving us a little more latitude. Some things that I've wanted to do since I started and wasn't able to do. And so now I'm like running with it and giving my team the go ahead to do a lot of things. So I'm really excited and kind of disappointed and sad I'm not going to be able to be a part of a lot of things this summer, but so excited that our residents are going to be able to really enjoy some of the stuff that we have to offer. And I'm glad you guys will be able to be a part of that.
Any questions?
Yeah. This is Sally.
Hi, Sally.
A couple questions. One question is, will you have families that are non-speaking English?
We have one family right now that's non-speaking English.
Okay.
We
how would you handle that? Because I don't speak English, but I could probably do a lot of hand motion.
Right, it's fine. We do the best we can with that, and really, staff, we help guide that. We have an interpreter line that we utilize a lot of times when talking to non-English speaking, or we had a deaf family here, and we used an interpreter a lot with them.
Okay. Another question, where do you get the books that you can read? Can you read to the kids?
Absolutely.
And I don't know where you get the books, like for teenagers, or does the library bring their books, so like a mobile book?
I just filled out a grant. I just got accepted for another grant for a donation of books. We have books. We have books for you.
Okay.
We have some in the resource room. We have some in the childcare area. We do a story time. And I am actually in the process, because we're short, teen books and more mature, age appropriate books for kids over 13. And so I'm in the process of that now.
Okay. I just wanted to know, I want to ask that too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I love encouraging the reading in the books for sure. Big on
Okay,
that.
great. Yep.
A lot of them haven't, a lot of the children haven't had books in the home. I always say a house without books is like a house without windows. So we give a child a book, at least one, sometimes more. I usually hand them out to new residents. So that is also a coping mechanism that they can like read to their kids before bed. And if they can't read themselves, it's still a fun nighttime routine where they can look at pictures and put things together. But it's encouraging literacy, and it's calming.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot of times these organizations, they offer books and books, when they get to the homes, do they just get put away? And they,
Right, right. Yeah.
they're never used and stuff
I'm trying to
because
educate as much as I can regarding that.
especially parents. I mean, some of the parents may not know how to read,
Well,
and the
that's what I
kids,
was saying. Like, so that's
yeah,
why I
the
encourage if
kids
they
are,
can't, that they can at least go through the book with their child or board books for younger kids. And it's still sitting there and having like a nighttime routine or, having books around the children, just knowing this is healthy, this is good, this is, we want to promote literacy.
yes, because sometimes the kids know more than the parents, and maybe some parents feel real threatened by
We
by
do see that. You're right. You're right on. We do see that for sure.
yeah. Okay, great. You've given us me
Yep.
a lot of
Thanks, Sally. Good
information. Thank you.
questions.
Uh-huh.
Hi, I have a question. So if a child does open up about abuse to you, I know you mentioned getting staff. Is that something that you let staff know after the fact and just kind of like continue the conversation, but just diverge the topic of the conversation and then let staff know later? Or should we kind of like pause the conversation to get staff?
I never want the child to feel like they did something wrong. And so if we're
Mhm.
doing it like, oh my gosh, they just said this and we get up and leave, then that's going to make the child feel like, uh-oh, like I'm in trouble. We
Mhm.
don't want to do that. So I would assess if it's something like quicker, like, oh, my dad used to do that to me, or like in passing, if they, it, or, is different than descript detail and the child starting to get triggered and it's more like feeling like it's going to be a counseling session and they're looking for a response from you than rather someone just to like listen and then say something in passing. Does that make sense? It's going to be, you can let us know, but I would not, I prefer you not just get up unless it's something triggering to you or you're uncomfortable and you can say, hey, you know what, I have to go to the oh, I'm so sorry right now, like this is bad. But watch your timing with it, because we don't want anyone to be like, oh, my dad just did this to me last night, and then you're like, oh, I'm out of here. You would say, oh, you know what, I think this is important, thank you so much for opening up to me. I think we need to share this with Miss Tracy, or I think we need to go get Miss Hannah, or someone like that too. And you make it an okay
Thank you.
thing that they opened up, but then, hey, this is important. What you have to say is so important. Let me get someone that can help us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
Mackenzie,
makes
did that make
sense.
sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
I have another question.
Sure.
Sally, restroom now, do they have they are able to just freely leave the play area and go to the restroom? Is there sometimes like in school, like if one kid has to go to the restroom, then they all want to go? I mean, then you just release them and they can just line up, or I don't know, some
You
people.
got this will be interesting for you guys, because again, until you're there, it's a hard to picture, but we're not crowded like that.
Okay.
There's times where we have no kids in there, and there are times that we have maybe 6 kids in there. It's very, very rare, other than like an event like we're having for the summer kickoff. Like we don't have like 20 kids ever, or like
Okay.
10 kids lining up. I mean, it's usually, oh, you have to go, and then back. And we have not had to really deal with that issue.
Okay, good. I didn't know how
Yeah,
much
and
it was like school.
Sally, the bathroom, like I said earlier, it's like right outside the playroom. The only thing they'll go to you and say, I have to go to the restroom. You're like, okay. And you open up the door and they go to the restroom. You just want to make sure they turn the corner correctly. And it's in the dining room.
Yes, yeah, because I'm familiar with it being, I work in the kitchen. But now, if they're there too long, I guess they know to not be there too long, or, we don't have to monitor that. Like if they're in there for a while, maybe they have to go poo poo. But I mean, you're not supposed to go into the restroom or anything. So
No.
I guess
If you feel like, oh, this child has been gone for 10 minutes, you can get staff and just be like, hey, I haven't seen Mackenzie in a while. She's in the bathroom. She's still in there. And then staff can handle that. They'll just knock on the door
great.
and they'll go from there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. I'm excited, everyone. Looking forward to meeting all you in person. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good. Kelsey and Chelsea, we doing good?
Yep, doing good.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Do you just want to move along?
I don't mind moving along. I'm ready.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Oh. Okay. You guys are doing great. I'm taking over from here now. So next we're going to talk about cultural. And I really think about your own culture. And this is a huge thing that I always tell our volunteers. Get to know everyone. We're changing, we're involving people, but get to know yourself, get to know your biases. We all have them. One thing, when I hear people that say that I don't have biases, you do. We have them. There are these things. It's learned behavior of what we do. I have to develop. There's some things that I was taught where I'm like, oh, I don't like this. I need to work on that. Like there are some things in our life that we have. So really get to know that and understand how does this affect where I volunteer, where I serve, and things like that. But today we're going to go over culture and culture competence, the fundamental of culture differences, and tips to remember when working in a shelter. So what is culture? It's a systematic of beliefs, values, and assumptions about life that guides behavior and are shared by a group of people that is passed down from generation to generation. So culture is always evolving, and it's passed down. I always say, my grandmother she is 78. There are beliefs that me and her do not see eye to eye, and it is sometimes from her culture, and then I'm trying to teach her about my culture. And I know when my daughter, who is 10 months old, when she is in her 30s where I'm at, we might see different things because culture is always changing. And then culture is our way of life. And that's what I find so magical and so beautiful is it's the way of life. It's how we go around. It makes the world so beautiful. Is my culture is different from all three of you guys. The way we grew up is differently. The things that we do in shelter. And the reason why this is so important is because we do serve a very diverse group. So people that come into our facility, the way they parent their child is going to be completely different from the way that I parent my child, or the way that you think that people should parent. So be mindful of that as well. Culture is filter which people process their experience and events of life. So it's how we experience life. It's how we process things. It's how we it's kind of how we make our stance on things. And then it influences people's value, actions, and expectation of themselves, and impact people's perception and expectations of others. And that's what I want to know, like, want everyone to know about your own biases, because it's our expectations of others. But being able to be humble and understanding, like, what I believe in is might be different in front of the next person, but being open, being understanding, listening to what they have to say and their perspective. Um, Characteristics of culture is learned, education, training, experience. Huge thing. I'm always telling people, read different books, read what's going on in today's society, always educating yourself. Listen to our residents, they are educating you. um, there are things like holidays that we celebrate. There was a holiday, I don't celebrate Ramadan, but there are some people in shelter that do. So I really sat down and understand, like, okay, how can we celebrate Ramadan for their culture? And because I didn't know that, I wanted to educate myself, and I learned from other residents and from a volunteer. Culture is shared, it's traits, attitudes, ideas, knowledge, and material objects that are shared by members of society. And then we share it from one another, and that leads on to culture is transmitted from one generation to another through language, verbal or nonverbal, through gestures or signs. Um, so when it comes to verbal, what I'm doing right now, communicating, but even nonverbal, like waving, uh, there are some nonverbal communications that are different from other cultures. And just also when it comes to nonverbal, know your cues on your facial expressions. We still wear masks in the building, so that helps. But I always say sometimes, like, you might just be mindful of the way you have your facial expressions, especially with kids. They want to see that upbeat personality. They want to see that you are excited for them. And then culture is always changing. Even in today's society, so much has changed. We have developed, especially like looking at the LGBT community. We still got some work to do there, but it has developed since my grandmother's generation. So that's the beauty of life. We're always changing. We are always growing. Um, so major elements of culture, symbols. So the way, like a stop sign, we know what a stop sign is, but it could be different from Brazil or other different cultures. Language. We speak majority in the United States is English. However, there are different languages that come into play. Like we said earlier, there are residents that, like, I am not fluent in Spanish. I struggled it, but we have a resident that's all she speaks. Now, the blessing is these cell phones have translation, so we can utilize that. If we can't, we can point to things. Language, do not let that be a barrier. If you do speak a different language, that's awesome. Let us know. But if not, don't worry about it. And I will say, a majority of the kids too, most of them all know English, even if their parents didn't. Norms, we all have norms. Those are the things of how we create and how we live. Rituals, um, values, and artifacts. So these are all major things of our culture. So, what is cultural competence? Cultural competence is the ability to interact effectively with people of diverse backgrounds and different identity groups by being sensitive, appreciative, respectful, and response to beliefs, practice, and culture needs that are different from your own. So again, we all have different beliefs. We all do things differently and how we live our lives. And it's so important to know that. Know your culture, know the things that you do, know your values. And this is why it comes into play with culture humility. So it is humble and respectful attitude towards individuals of other cultures that pushes one to challenge their own culture biases, realize they cannot possibly know everything about other cultures, and approach learning about other cultures as a lifelong goal and process. We will not know everyone's culture. There will be times where you will offend somebody. And that is really hard. But no, be humble enough to say, I apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that could be hurtful. And because there are things that we could say and do in our culture that's fine, but is not okay in somebody else's culture. And understand their perspective. Like Tracy said, you might not know how they're feeling. You may never experience what they're feeling, but try to understand it and listen. And then just be positive with it. And you don't have to stand with it, but you just have to come to the understanding. That's what culture humility is about. Knowing your culture and being humble enough to learn about other people's culture. Um, the importance of culture competence, one gains a broader of perspective that acknowledges the existence of different realities that require neither comparison nor judgment. So not judging people, that's a huge thing in our shelter, especially our residents. Some of them already feel like, because their abuser made them feel worthless, like that is a huge thing. They come in and then they feel like people are judging them, and then when you have new volunteers come into place, they also think that. So don't compare nor judge. One can be aware of likely areas of potential cross cultural miscommunication. So we can miscommunicate, and that happens even in my own household. Between me and my husband, we grew up different, we have different cultures, we have total different backgrounds of living, and we do have sometimes miscommunication, and it is okay to say, I am sorry, I misunderstood that. um, and really work. That's the blessing of why it's important to communicate. And then the lack of knowledge about different cultures can limit one's ability to provide quality service. That's why it's so important for our staff to always understand different cultures and be up to date on training and what's going on in our community, because if we have this lack of ability, if we are not wanting to know other people's culture, or we're not wanting to know what's going on in our community, that is going to limit our way we provide services. It is important. It's important for our residents to feel safe. It's important for our residents to know, hey, this LSS choices might not know my culture, but they're willing to listen. They're willing to hear me out. They're not making judgment. They're linking me with other services. There are services within Franklin County that specialize in different people's culture, where they're where, like, so we have, if you're an immigrant, and we have service lines, we might not know what it's like to be an immigrant or what that looks like, some of our staff, but we will make sure that we are linking with other service lines. And just being able, like, the huge thing I say, be a listening ear, and don't diminish anyone's culture. um, how to achieve this culture of humility. So awareness, be cautious of your own attitudes and biases. Again, I cannot stress that. Know your own biases. There are things that there are times where I'm like, oh, that hit me. Like, I didn't think I was like that. But yes, know your own biases. Knowledge, gather information about different cultural groups. And then skills, develop skills for communication and interaction of across culture. Um, Understand different culture differences. So what does that look like? Communication styles. Realize words, phrases, and other different ways. Be aware of nonverbal communication. So again, football. I will tell you, I had a cultural, last week I was playing um outside with a child, and he was like, let's play football, and I was like, we don't have a football, and he's like, yeah, we have a football, and I'm like, no, there's no football. I'm thinking of football, of what we do in the United States. We consider football a football. um but football can also mean soccer, and that in this child's culture was soccer, and we did have a soccer ball outside. Once he kicked the soccer, he's like, we have a football, and he kicked the soccer ball to me. I was like, oh. So again, that was a cultural difference from my parts, and me thinking football of that. So again, football has two different meanings of words. Again, beware of your nonverbal communication. How we greet, sometimes a wave to some cultures isn't like a hi. And so different things like a thumbs up, I forget which culture, sometimes does not mean good. And then attitudes towards conflict. Some cultures view conflict as a positive thing, while others view it as something to be avoided. So here in the United States, we are definitely the culture that really, when it comes to conflict, we want to be able to work it out. We're always talking about, like in companies, give feedback, positive feedback. If it's negative feedback, please still give that in a positive way. We're always trying to work on things like that. But there are some cultures where they'll just avoid it, where it's like, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about any feedback. We don't want to talk about conflicts. Approaches to completing tasks. Cultures have different access to resources, different judgment of rewards, different concept of time. Time, huge thing. So here in the United States, we are go, 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 go. You will see that all the time. Like sometimes we are not very good at sitting still. I will tell you, I went to Italy. They are two different when it comes to time, and they will say that. Like we went to a restaurant, and at Italy, it took us about 3 hours to complete our courses. Here in the United States, I mean, I just went to dinner and they told my husband, you have 45 minutes, then we have to go on to the next one. In Italy, they are very different. They want you to come. They treat dinner and the time of dinner as an experience. They want you to sit throughout the whole time. Here, they're like, let's move on to the next table. So again, approaches to time, it varies. Decision-making style. The roles individual play in decision-making vary widely from culture to culture. That is huge, how we make our decisions. Again, parenting tactics, like the way they make their decisioning style with their child. Again, like we do not allow spanking here in the shelter, no violence. And we talk to parents. Tracy will have sit down. They're like, well, that's what how we behave our children. We have to explain, like, it cannot happen here in our shelter. Attitudes towards disclosure. So some cultures, it's appropriate to be frank and emotion, like be on top of your emotion, tell you how it is. And other cultures, they're like, keep it to yourself. I will tell you, even in my own family, like we are kind of keep it up the wall, except for me, I'm an open book. But there are some people in my family that we were taught, like, you do not share, you do not disclose anything. Or there are people like me who can be an open book. Approaches to knowing, so difference among culture groups when it comes to the way that people know or learn. Parenting is a common culture difference. How they address their children, definition of childhood adultness, and adults vary by cultural beliefs. Discipline, again, example, spanking, physical discipline is not viewed negatively. Being mindful of that. I've watched volunteers who are like, I would not do that. And it's hard. It can be hard when you see something where you're like, that is not okay. If you realize that, please let staff know. Tracy and her team are always writing down. They are meeting with parents. So we don't want volunteers to get involved and say, hey, that's not okay. We want you to go to the staff and let them work it out with that resident. Exercise. Think about how differently your parents or your children parents compared to you. So really think about that. Like, and the reason I say that, and I joke with my husband, because there are times where I'm like, I will never, this happened to me about a month ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, I said I would never do this, and here I am acting some of the behaviors my mom does, because it is a learned behavior. What your parents taught you is then what you sometimes go on. You can change that, but again, just reflect on that, how that has shaped you, or whoever taught you in life, how that has shaped you. Other things to remember, again, be self-aware. It's so important. Be self-aware. Values individual differences, capacity, and abilities. Respect differences in family home life. So it is vital. I mean, there are times where I'm like, I don't understand this, but I have to be respectful and be understanding. And that's where the humility comes into play. And then recognize that diversity contributes to the riches of our society. Um, Other things to recognize that your own beliefs about women, men, sexuality, sexual orientation, race, culture, religion may differ from the beliefs of others. Huge, huge. All of that. Recognize that of like, and understand what could trigger you that could trigger your reaction with another resident. Seek out information about the cultures and community to build an awareness and appreciate of different cultures. Learn to recognize stereotypes. That is huge. And dismissal those myths, especially when you are volunteering and you're out in the community. Please, please let people know, like, hey, that is not okay. That's not appropriate. Or understand their culture. I think that's a huge thing. I always tell my friends and family, like, that is maybe I always say, like, why would they do that? And it's like, don't switch to why. Maybe think about like what made that behavior the way that is. Maybe it's taking place within their family. And then recognize that domestic violence is a crime and that affects everyone, regardless of their age, gender, and culture. And that's huge. Domestic violence is a crime. Um, any questions? It's a quick PowerPoint of culture. Any questions in regards to culture? You guys, we're flying through this. Are we doing good?
Yep. Well, just a comment. I know this world is changing a lot, and the country, the cultures and stuff in the United States are so. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and I see it so much. So we're gonna, whether you like it or not, you're gonna be, you're gonna have to know or be aware of that, because
Mm-hmm.
your neighbors are going to be from other countries and everything. It's going to be, it's just more and more people are coming to this country, and just, you just have to go along with it. That's it.
All righty, one more slide, and it is boundaries. And on this slide, there will be interaction on the chat box. Can you guys all see the chat box and type in it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Boundaries are favorite part. This is vital. This is important. We all have boundaries. I actually realized in this line of field, I have weak boundaries. I was like, oh, I need to set some better boundaries for myself. So, what is boundaries? Boundaries limits the define of acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So these are things that we say, this is what we say is yay, this is what is not okay. We set boundaries. This is how we don't get overburnt. This is how you set boundaries for your family. You set boundaries for your personal self. This is really important when you are a volunteer, especially in this line of field. It provides the framework for healthy relationships between volunteer and residents, and there are limits that we set that we can provide meaningful support to our residents. When it comes to LSS choices, residents are coming in and they have no boundaries. Reason is their abuser took away their own needs. They have took away their control. They controlled them. They set their boundaries. So when they come in, they don't have boundaries. So sometimes they have this miscommunication, or they're just trying to, like Lillian said, survive. So that's why it's so important that we as staff and as volunteers, we are setting boundaries, and staff is working with residents for them to set their own boundaries. So why is boundaries so important? They provide safety for both the volunteer and the resident. They make things predictable. When our interactions with residents are consistent, residents have a clear and appropriate expectation of volunteer and staff. And it's so important that we all follow this, is because as volunteers, let's say, Chelsea, you are following the boundaries guidelines where it says, I'm not going to give any gifts. I know it's, I shouldn't be doing that. And then we have, I'm just, you guys, I know this isn't going to happen, but Kelsey comes in and gives a child a gift. Now that person thinks, the child who got a gift thinks that all our volunteers are going to come in and give a gift. So then we made things confusing for our residents and what's appropriate and not appropriate. And that's the same for staff. We always have to be run, oh, you can't do that because if you do this, then they're going to think that. And think about that. That is human in nature of what we do. It also protects residents, volunteers, staff, and choices by promoting healthy interactions, and it ensures the relationship between volunteers, residents remain professional. So, our type of boundaries. Social relationship exists between people who enjoy each other's company and have shared interests. Each party is equal responsible to establish and maintain the relationship and address power imbalances. So this is where we have these social, where you're with your friends, where you're sometimes with your family members. Like, this is where you have equal relationship. You do not have a social relationship with residents. Why? Because it's more of a professional relationship. You get to be in areas that residents don't get to be in. For example, they don't get to go in the donation center. You have access to areas that residents don't have access to. And so that's why there is this professional relationship. Residents may not be, again, aware of appropriate boundaries. This is often because residents are in crisis and because their boundaries have been violated and ignored. Again, their abuser violated, ignored their boundaries. So now they're coming in here and they have to reset what is their boundaries. So it's important that we as staff and as volunteers remain professional. Cross boundaries. So what is the danger of cross boundary? Cross boundaries take place when a volunteer transitions from caring for about a resident, so we have this professional relationship, to becoming involved in or influencing a resident's life experience into this social relationship. So first you have this professional relationship, then you might be getting to know this resident and it switches to more of a social. That is when it gets to that cross boundary. For example, you are working with a resident and then they're like, hey, I'm struggling and I need a gas gift card. And then you're like, okay, I have built this relationship. I'm just going to slide and give you. Now you've switched to this social relationship. Now this resident might expect, okay, we have developed this relationship. I can go to them when I need a gas gift card again. If I need another need met. The volunteer resident relationship is one of unequal power. Again, volunteers have access to resources, authority, and influence that residents needs, creating vulnerability. You have access to areas that residents don't. Residents can perceive cross boundary as the misuse of power and betrayal of trust. That's a huge thing, especially when we do new resident orientation, we're letting them know, like, hey, these are what volunteers can and cannot do. This is what staff can and cannot do. Our whole goal when residents come into shelter is we want to make sure we're able to meet their needs, but make sure that they are gaining the strength where they can go out in the community and be able to successfully do things. And so staff is giving them the coping skills and skills to be able to utilize. So we want to make sure that we're not having these cross boundaries, because they're going to mistrust us. If you do things that they're like, hey, I thought you weren't supposed to do that, then they're confused. And think about that even on a kid's perspective. I think about, you set these boundaries for your child, and then when you break those boundaries, they're confused. They're like, okay, well, then I can do this then. Cross boundaries can cause minor or major physical, emotional, and economic harm on a resident. How and why do we do cross boundary? How is Dull relationship. Sharing more than one relationship with the resident, social and professional, creates confusion and unfair expectation for both the resident and volunteer. Again, we need to make sure it's this professional. We don't want to cross that social. It does make things confusing for the resident. Sharing intimate personal information or experience with a client. Meeting your own personal emotional needs within the helping relationship. That power in relationship is not equal. Residents should be focused on their experience, not of others. So that is so vital, especially if you've experienced domestic violence. Sharing a story is powerful, not here in our shelter, because we really want them to get to know their own needs. So it is really, really important that we're a listening ear, that we're not sharing our experience. Now, if a resident is asking like personal information about like, hey, do you have kids? It's okay to say, yep, I have kids. I have 3 kids. You don't have to go in detail. We don't want you to go in detail of their life, but you can say like, yep, I have kids. No, I don't. That way you can have that type of relationship. Or if the child's asking you like, hey, what's your favorite color? Please tell them your favorite color. What we don't want to see is where you start sharing your personal story, where you start sharing your thing. Or if you're like, I've had a terrible day, this is why. Now, what we want to do is now the resident is not even focusing on their needs. They're now focusing on your needs. And then spending personal resources. This can lead to compassion fatigue, especially like if the resident is coming to you and they're in need of things and you keep giving them things and helping them, you're at one point going to be fatigued out. So it's vital. Just redirect them. Hey, go to staff if they're in need of items. Your goal is to be that listening ear. And then why? Unhealthy emotional attachment. Experience excess feeling of empathy or sympathy for residents. Negative impact both the resident and volunteer. Um, so you will get emotional. It is hard when you hear when you hear what some of our residents go through, it can be hard, but making sure that we set those boundaries, making sure that you can provide sympathy and empathy, but making sure you're not getting too involved where you are getting to the point of burnt out. Not recognizing professional limits, not seeing yourself as unique or above the roles, able to make situational expectations. So making sure that you are following guidelines and making sure that, hey, that you don't think you're above the roles, and that's a huge thing, that you're not overstepping staff and that you are providing that listening ear. And then altruistic instincts. We are conditioned to help in any way we can. This leads to boundary violation. We are helping human beings. That's what the world is around, but being mindful of that. Remember, we can't help everyone. Remember our rules as volunteers. Remember, you have that staff support, that your goal as volunteers is to come in, be a lending help, listen, be positive. But that doesn't mean that you have to come in and provide them every need, like making sure we're giving them the clothes, hygiene, supplies, everything. That's where you can get the staff help. Preventing boundary crossing. So know the volunteers' policy and procedures, add choices. Self-evaluation. It's easier to set effective boundaries when you are aware of your own needs, strengths, weakness, feeling, personality patterns, and life experience, which may impact the way you relate to residents. Factors that may influence your perception of boundaries. Again, your culture, background, your gender. Our gender does play. Age is a huge thing. You never want to say it, but again, my grandmother and I sometimes don't see things the same, or my mother and I don't see things the same because culture has changed. Socioeconomic class, your religious values, that's a huge thing. Know what you believe in is completely different from what a resident might believe in, and don't put your religion based on that resident. Be mindful. And then educational background. Consult with Choices staff if you're unsure of where boundaries exist or whether you're in danger of crossing boundaries. We're here to help. So you could be like, I don't know if I'm overstepping. I don't know if this is okay. Let staff know. We can tell you, yay, that's good. I know some people are like, can I hug? If the resident is asking for a hug, that's great. You can hug, but do not just go and hug a resident if they don't want to hug. But there are some situations you're like, I don't know. Come get a staff and we'll let you know. And then communicate effectively and set expectations when working with residents. Compassion fatigue. This is huge, and I don't want this to lead on to volunteers. Even to staff, we will have to say, like, hey, I need a break. Lillian, who you guys talk to, she will tell her staff, like, you need a break. You need to take a breather. Volunteers can experience secondary trauma resulting from empathetic engagement. When you hear stories, especially really hard stories, it can be hard. It can be emotional. So it's okay to walk away. It's okay to come to the volunteer suite and say, I need a breather. Compassion fatigue can impact the helper's sense of self, worldview, spirituality. Um, and it's okay if you're like, I had a hard day with a kid. This was hard. I need to take a break, Mackenzie, for a month. That's okay. Let me know. Or if you're like, we had a situation where the resident, for example, one of the child volunteers, like we said earlier, it was hard at first for her to, it hit her that this child was unable to read. Fourth grade, and she wasn't upset with the child, she was upset with our system of how dare the school system, she felt, that did not catch this. So she wanted to just step away. So that was a huge thing. Compassion fatigue is normal reaction to stressful, traumatizing work, but self-care can prevent compassion fatigue, allowing you to help the survivors. We do not have an unlimited capacity to care for ourselves and others. Once we reach the capacity, it's difficult to maintain healthy support. That is huge. I have, this past year, I got compassion fatigue, and how I realize it is I started to get irritable, and I'm like, oh, that is not okay. I needed to take a break. And that's what you guys will realize as volunteers. Like, if you're like, man, that is not the reaction I'm going with, let us know. It's okay. Like, I know I said you have to serve twice a month for a year. Like, but if there's a month where you're like, Kenzie, I need a break, let us know. Um, Preventing compassion fatigue. So here are some self-care that you can do. Journal, meditate, walking, exercising, eating healthy, maintaining boundaries, take a breather. If you're experiencing it, talk with me. And again, we have the volunteer suite. So here are acceptable interactions. A volunteer self-disclose or giving limited personal information in order to build resident trust. Again, if a resident's going up to you and they're like, how's your day? And you're like not explaining to them how's your day, meaning how you can say, my day's going pretty good. Or if your day's not going good, you can say, you know what, today's an okay day. Be honest. You want to develop a relationship, they got to get to know you a little. Again, if they're asking you like, hey, do you have any kids? Yeah, I have 3 kids. You don't have to go into depth about your kids, but you can say how many kids you have. That's a way to develop a trusting relationship. Also, especially, or if they're like, hey, do you have experience with working with kids? The parent wants to know, if I'm going to let my child drop my child off, I want to know that, hey, Sally's worked with kids before. That's helpful to know. Listen to residents without providing advice or guidance, especially because our staff, again, they are providing guidance and advice. Sometimes they just want a listening ear. Engaging in caring physical contact with the resident, hugging, holding hands when given permission. So it has to be given permission. Now with kids, sometimes they just might go up and hug you. And you also, like, if you're not comfortable with hugs, you can say, like, you know what, let's do an elbow bump instead. You can say that. Boundary violation, discussing your intimate life details with residents, buying gifts, accepting gifts from residents. Okay, so accepting gifts. If a resident, like a child, like made you a card, you can take the card. We do try to encourage, though, like if they make something, be like, hey, how about you give it to your parent? Or if the resident has like a gift card and they want to give it to you. That is unacceptable. You would just say, hey, that's something we don't accept as volunteers. I really appreciate you thinking of me, but that's something that I'm unable to accept, but thank you. Providing your personal contact information, huge. Do not give out your contact information. You will build relationships, but even if they're like, hey, I'm leaving, I would love to give you my mailing address, or like, can I have your mailing address so I can send you a card? Something what you would say is like, no, but Mackenzie has my address. If you want to send something, give it to her and she'll be able to forward it on to me. And then encourage or inviting external relationship with the resident during or after their time in shelter. So I am going to go over a question, and so again, the chat box is available. So how it's going to work is you're going to say, this is cross boundary. I'm going to give a scenario. You're going to say if this is cross boundary or it's not crossing boundary. You can explain to me why it's cross boundary. And so any questions at all? Okay. So Sue is a volunteer, was listening to another resident speak about their abuser and how she is struggling to cope with the situation. Sue shared her story about her abuser and suggested a different coping mechanism that would work for her. Would this be cross boundaries, or yes or no, and maybe why? And you can put yourself off mute too. So this is, yep, Kelsey, it is a cross boundary. One is she's sharing her story and discussing, yes, her personal experience with the abuser. Again, we ask that in our shelter, you don't share your story with the of what your abuse look like. Let her talk, or let the resident talk, and then you just be that listening ear. Another one is Jennifer is leaving shelter and she asked Kelly, the volunteer, so Jennifer is the resident, for her address. Jennifer wants to send a thank you card to Kelly, letting her know that she appreciates all her volunteer work at Choices. For, yep. For this situation, again, it is okay if they want to send you a thank you card. That is great. Redirect them to me and say, hey, you can give a thank you card to Mackenzie. She'll make sure it gets to me, but I can't give out my personal address. So Sam was having an emotional day and asked Molly, the volunteer, if she could have a hug. Yep, that's correct. And then you as a volunteer can say, Molly could have said, you know what, I do not want to hug. She has that right too. But yes, you can hug because she asked. Bill needed pull-ups for his daughter. Monica went to Target and purchased 2 packs of pull-ups. When she saw Bill at her next volunteer shift, she gave him the pull-ups. Yep. Now this is where you as a volunteer can be like, hey, did you ask the advocates if they have any pull-ups? And then you can come to me and be like, Kenzie, are we low on pull-ups? I understand that Bill he asked me for pull-ups. But you do not want to be giving any gifts. Matt was picking up his kids from the childcare area, stopped and had a conversation with David, the volunteer. Matt asked David if he had any kids. David let Matt know that he had 2 girls and a boy. Yep, just providing limited information. So yes, that's not cross-boundary. Jessica was leaving shelter in a couple days. She enjoyed when the local church came to serve at Choices. She asked Shelby, the group coordinator, if she could have more information about their service and if she could talk with somebody about getting involved at their church. For this one, it's a little bit different. So if it's about the church, she can give them like the church website and just say, hey, this is the church. If you go to the website, that's where you can get the service. Or if you have a pamphlet of your church, you can do that, but do not give any of your personal information, like your cell phone out and say, give me a call or we can link up and I can take you to church. Please do not do that, but you can give your like church brochure. Lillian, the volunteer, just served a meal at Choice's Kitchen. On her way out, Lacey asked her if she can drop her off at the library down the road. Do not give out any rides to a resident. You are held, that's a liability. And if they need a ride somewhere, they can talk with their case manager or our advocates to discuss getting a ride. That is not anyone's responsibility. So it's a huge cross boundary. Little Sally was coloring with Patty the volunteer. After she finished coloring, she gave the picture to Patty. Yep, great answer, Kelsey. Not cross boundary, but Patty could thank her and ask if she'd rather give it to someone in her family instead. Yep, if she's like, no, I really want you to have it, then you can take the picture. So again, things to remember, boundaries are not always easy to maintain, even for seasoned professionals. Sometimes we do cross boundaries. It's okay, just talk with staff. Don't be afraid to again talk if you're questionable any situations. Boundaries are important to have effective and healthy relationships, and it's not our role to solve every problem our residents face. That's huge. Our staff is trained to provide the tools and resources allow residents to make their own choices. Oh, so that is our boundaries training and our training. See, I told you we would get done a little bit earlier. Before I'm going to ask questions. So what this looks like next is, and we'll talk about boundaries in just a second, but what's going to happen next is give me a couple days. I'm going to be sending you all an email. But really what it looks like is we're not going to open the playroom up till June 6th. That's when it's going to open up. I'm going to send you the link of how you can sign up for shifts. Again, we do ask that you serve twice a month for a year. If you're like can't do it 1 month or stuff comes up, just communicate that with me. Your first shift, you will have, like all times, you'll have staff with you in the room, but we'll make sure to be guiding you throughout the whole process. And we are just so excited. As a volunteer too, I will send you guys newsletters of the childcare newsletters that they pass out along with the monthly volunteer newsletter. But you guys might get more information of the childcare area. But any questions for me?
I don't have any.
Okay.
This is Sally. Nope, no questions. Very informative. Looking forward to starting to help.
Yeah, awesome.
I don't have any questions.
All righty. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Saturday then. And thank you, and look out for an email come Monday, okay?
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you, Mackenzie. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.